Have you ever heard those stories that sound so unbelievable, yet you know they could happen to anyone? This is one of those. And before I even get into it, I want you to imagine this. You're starving, like really starving. You haven't had a proper meal in days. Your stomach is empty, your head is spinning, and you're holding on to the last piece of food you've got, the only thing standing between you and another night of pain. Then, out of nowhere, a stranger crosses your path. They look worse than you. Hollow eyes, shaking hands, the face that makes you stop and think, this person might not make it through the night. Now, the choice sits in your hands. Do you give up your last bit of food to save someone else, knowing it might break you? Or do you keep it because survival is survival? That's the moment my Uncle Samuel faced when he was only 17. He wasn't some saint. He wasn't wealthy or famous. He was just a boy trying to stay alive in a city that chewed people up and spat them out. He told me this story once, years later, but the way he described it, it felt like I was standing right there with him on that cold night, watching it all happen. And the part that'll make your skin crawl? The man he gave his food to, the man he thought he'd never see again, showed up years later in a black limousine. But let me backtrack because you need to understand where my uncle was then. This wasn't some dramatic, made-up tale. He grew up in the kind of neighborhood where people disappeared without warning. No one called the police, no one knocked on your door to check if you were okay. It was survival of the fittest, every single day. His father had left when he was 9, his mother worked herself to the bone to keep the lights on, and by 17 he was basically raising himself. Money was so tight that meals weren't guaranteed. He told me some nights he went to bed with only tap water in his stomach, just to trick his body into thinking he wasn't starving. That night, the one that changed everything, was one of those nights. He'd scraped together a stale piece of bread and half a tin of beans from a neighbor who owed him a favor. It wasn't much, but to him it was gold. He found a spot under the broken street lamp outside the old laundromat, sat on the cold pavement, and held the food in his hands for a while. That's how bad it was. He didn't even eat it immediately. He stared at it like his brain couldn't believe he'd actually gotten something to eat. And then, as he was about to take that first bite, he noticed someone across the street. At first, he thought it was just another junkie, maybe looking for scraps in the trash cans. But when the man staggered closer, Samuel realized he was young, probably in his early 20s. His clothes were torn, his face was thin, and his lips trembled as if he hadn't spoken to anyone in days. What struck Samuel the most was the man's eyes locked onto the food in his hands. Not his face, shoes, or bag, just the bread and beans. Samuel said it was like looking at his own reflection. That same kind of hunger, that same desperation. The man didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, swaying slightly, breathing like each inhale hurt. Samuel could have ignored him. Most people in that neighborhood did. You mind your own business if you want to stay safe. But there was something in the air that night. He told me he couldn't explain it. It was like a voice in his head whispered, "If you walk away now, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." So he did something completely reckless, which still shocks me when I think about it. He broke the bread in half, scooped the beans onto the pieces, and stretched his hand to this stranger. And the way the guy grabbed it, Samuel said he looked like he hadn't eaten in a week. He devoured it, crumbs falling to the pavement, not even caring who was watching. If you're enjoying the video, please subscribe and turn on your notifications too. But here's where it gets strange. After finishing, the man looked at Samuel and spoke for the first time. His voice was raspy, weak, but the words were clear. "I won't forget this." Then, without another word, he walked off into the night. That should have been the end of it. A random act of kindness, gone and forgotten in a city that never remembers. But years later, Samuel didn't think much about that night once it was over. Hunger had a way of wiping memories clean. When your stomach aches every day, when the noise of emptiness inside you is louder than anything else, you don't sit around remembering some stranger you gave food to. You just try to get through the next 24 hours. That was Samuel's reality. And after handing away the only meal he had, he paid for it. He told me the hunger that followed was worse than anything he could describe. His chest felt hollow. His lips cracked from dryness. He lay awake for hours that night, stomach twisting in pain, asking himself why he'd done it. Why had he given away the one thing that might have carried him through the night? But the human mind is strange. The memory of the man's face, that desperation and that line, "I won't forget this," kept replaying in his head like a broken record. And though his body was weak, something about that thought kept him going. Almost like a strange kind of fuel, as if he'd traded food for hope. Still, survival was survival, and Samuel went right back to the grind of odd jobs and side hustles the very next morning. He'd shine shoes, carry heavy bags at the market, sweep dusty shop floors, anything that paid him a few coins. Now, I want you to picture this. A 17-year-old boy with calloused hands, shoes so worn out that the soles flapped when he walked, and clothes that were almost see-through from being washed too many times. That was my uncle. He didn't have the luxury of school or hanging out with friends. Every hour of his day was about getting food on the table. But the city wasn't kind. Sometimes he'd work an entire day and come home with nothing because the boss decided not to pay. Other times he'd get cheated out of his wages. He grew up fast. Too fast. Weeks turned into months and months into years. That one night faded like a half-remembered dream. Samuel would sometimes think about that man when he passed by the old laundromat, but he never expected to see him again. Life just didn't work that way where he came from. People disappeared. They either ended up in jail, on drugs, or in the ground. Nobody came back to thank you for your kindness. If anything, kindness was seen as weakness. By the time Samuel hit his 20s, he was tougher, leaner, and smarter. He had found steadier work at a construction site, lifting bricks and mixing cement under the scorching sun. It was back-breaking labor, but it was money. Enough to afford a plate of rice a day, sometimes even meat when business was good. He was still poor, still clawing his way out of nothing, but at least he wasn't starving anymore. And here's where the story starts to twist. Because life has this way of setting you up, planting little seeds in your past that only bloom years later when you least expect it. One evening after work, Samuel sat outside the same laundromat where he once shared his last meal. The building hadn't changed much, still broken windows, still graffiti covering the walls. But Samuel had changed. His shoulders were broader, his face older. He wasn't the starving boy anymore. He was a man who had learned to fight for every crumb. As he sat there, eating from a paper plate of rice and beans, he suddenly thought of that stranger. And it hit him, what if that man had died? What if giving him food that night hadn't saved him at all? The thought was heavy, but Samuel shrugged it off. There was no way to know. He had too much on his own plate to worry about some ghost from the past. He needed to focus on surviving tomorrow. That's what he thought. That's what he believed. Until the night the limousine showed up. He was walking home late, dirt still clinging to his clothes from the construction site, when he heard the sound of tires slowing down behind him. Not the rattle of an old taxi, not the loud roar of a delivery truck, but something smooth. Expensive. He turned around and there it was, a black limousine polished so clean it reflected the streetlights like a mirror. It didn't belong on that side of town. Cars like that never did. The window rolled down and a voice called his name. Not, hey you. Not boy. His actual name, Samuel. He froze. How did someone in a car like that know his name? Samuel stood there on the cracked sidewalk, his body frozen like someone had pressed pause on his life. The limousine idled quietly, its headlights washing the street in a pale glow, making the weeds growing through the pavement look almost silver. Nobody in that neighborhood drove a car like that. Nobody even dared to. A black limo here was like a diamond ring dropped in the middle of a trash heap. It didn't belong and it drew eyes from every shadow. But what shook Samuel even more wasn't the car. It was the voice. His name. Clear as day. Samuel. He hadn't heard it spoken like that in years. Firm, confident, like whoever was inside knew him personally. He scanned the street, half expecting this to be some kind of prank, some trap. People got kidnapped in this city. People got tricked. His instincts screamed at him to keep walking, to pretend he hadn't heard. Yet his legs wouldn't move. The tinted window rolled down further, and that's when he saw a face. A man in a crisp suit, collar sharp, wrist heavy with a watch that probably cost more than every pair of shoes Samuel had ever owned combined. But what froze his blood wasn't the wealth, it was the eyes. He knew those eyes. Hollow once, desperate once, now sharp, alive, but still carrying a shadow of something he'd seen before. "Do you remember me?" the man asked. His voice was steady, calm, but with something else beneath it, something Samuel couldn't place. At first, Samuel's mind scrambled. The years had worn down memories, blurred faces into nothing. But then, like a film reel snapping into focus, it hit him. The street lamp. The bread. The beans. Those same eyes, staring at food like they were looking at salvation. The man in the limo was the stranger he'd fed years ago. Samuel's mouth went dry. He couldn't speak. How was this possible? That man had been nothing more than skin and bones, someone who looked one step away from collapsing. And now he sat inside a car that screamed power, success, and danger all at once. The man leaned forward slightly, smiling in a way that wasn't entirely warm. "I told you I wouldn't forget." That sentence, the same one Samuel had heard years ago in the dead of night, crawled across his skin like ice. He wanted to reply, but his throat felt locked. All he managed to whisper was, It's you? The man nodded. Get in. Now, in any normal situation, anyone with sense would have walked away. A stranger in a limo calling your name, telling you to get in? That's the kind of story that usually ends with someone vanishing, their picture ending up on a telephone pole days later. But this wasn't just any stranger. This was a man Samuel had saved, even if just for one night. And the way he spoke, the way he said his name, carried a weight Samuel couldn't ignore. Against every survival instinct in his body, he stepped closer to the limo. The driver, a stone-faced man in a black cap, opened the back door. The interior glowed with soft lights, leather seats so clean they looked untouched. The air smelled faintly of cologne and something stronger like whiskey. Samuel hesitated at the doorframe, one hand gripping the edge so tightly his knuckles went white. Don't worry, the man inside said, gesturing to the seat opposite him. You're safe with me. I just want to talk. Safe. That word didn't sit right. Nothing about this was safe. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when it's tied to a ghost from your past. Samuel climbed in, the door shutting behind him with a heavy thud that made his chest tighten. The city outside disappeared, swallowed by tinted glass and the low hum of the engine as the limo pulled away from the curb. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The man poured himself a drink, the ice clinking against the glass. Then he leaned back, studying Samuel like he was trying to read every scar on his face. You gave me your last meal once, he finally said. I never forgot that. In fact, it changed everything for me. Samuel's heart thudded in his chest. He didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and impossible to ignore. It changed everything for me. Samuel shifted uncomfortably in the leather seat. The contrast was almost surreal. He was still wearing his dusty work clothes, his hands stained with cement from the construction site, while across from him sat a man in a tailored suit, sipping whiskey in a limousine. It felt like two different worlds colliding in a space too small to hold them both. The man didn't rush. He swirled the ice in his glass, watching it melt slightly, then looked up at Samuel with a sharp intensity. Do you know what it feels like, he began slowly, to be so close to death that even one bite of food feels like a miracle? Samuel didn't answer. He didn't need to. He'd lived it. The man gave a thin smile. That night, I was done. I had nothing left. My family had abandoned me, I'd burned every bridge with friends, and the streets were eating me alive. I had already made peace with the fact that I wouldn't wake up the next morning. And then you, some kid I didn't even know, handed me half your food. Do you realize how insane that was? You were starving yourself. Samuel finally found his voice. I don't know why I did it. You just looked worse than me. His voice cracked slightly, embarrassed at the honesty in it. The man leaned forward, setting his drink aside. His eyes narrowed, but not with anger, more like someone pulling apart an old memory. That one act, it did something to me. It lit this fire in my chest, like a spark I didn't know I still had. I told myself if some stranger who had nothing could still give, then maybe I wasn't finished yet. Maybe I could crawl my way back. That night, I decided I wasn't going to die on those streets. He paused, letting the words sink in. The hum of the limo engine was the only sound for a few seconds. Samuel felt his skin prickle. It was strange hearing how much weight that moment carried for this man, when for Samuel it had just been instinct. A choice he hadn't even thought through. The man continued, his tone harder now. I left that neighborhood the very next morning. I begged my way into a shelter, cleaned myself up, and started hustling in a different way. At first, it was just washing dishes, sweeping restaurant floors, but I kept pushing. I took chances. I didn't care if I had to break rules. I wasn't going back to starving. I couldn't. And every time I felt like giving up, I remembered that moment, your face, your hand giving me food you desperately needed yourself. Samuel listened, torn between awe and unease. There was power in the man's words, but also something darker, like whatever roads he'd walked since then hadn't all been clean. The man smirked, leaning back into his seat, stretching his arms out across the leather. Years later, I built everything you see now. Businesses, connections, influence. People respect me, fear me. And through it all, I kept thinking, one day I'm going to find that kid, the one who gave me a chance to live. Because without him, none of this would exist. Without you, Samuel, I'd be bones in an unmarked grave. Samuel swallowed hard. The inside of the limo suddenly felt too small, too heavy with the weight of what he was hearing. He never thought his small act of kindness could ripple into something this big, this intimidating. The man leaned forward again, his voice dropping lower, almost conspiratorial. So I found you. I had people look into that neighborhood, track names, follow rumors. It wasn't easy, but I don't let things go unfinished. And when I finally heard where you worked, I knew it was time. He smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was sharp, deliberate. Because I owe you, Samuel. More than I can ever explain. The words should have comforted him. They should have felt like a blessing. But the way the man said it, the weight in his tone, it didn't sound like a promise. It sounded like something else entirely. The limo glided smoothly through streets Samuel had walked his entire life, but from the inside they looked different. Smaller, quieter, almost like they weren't even real anymore. He kept his eyes fixed on the stranger. No, not a stranger anymore, but not quite a friend either. A man he once saved, now dressed in success so sharp it almost cut the air. The man poured another drink, but didn't hand one to Samuel. Instead, he gestured around at the car, the driver, the suit, the watch. All this, he said, his voice steady, was built from the ashes of that night. I climbed up from nothing. And I mean nothing. You know how it feels. Samuel nodded slightly, though his stomach twisted. You did know. Hunger, dirt under your nails that never washes out, the shame of begging when you swore you never would. He knew it too well. The man went on. At first it was honest work. I scrubbed dishes, stacked crates, carried boxes. But honest work only takes you so far. You break your back and the bosses still treat you like trash. They pay you just enough to keep you crawling back. You know the game. Samuel's throat tightened. He knew it better than anyone. He was still living it. The man's smile faded and his tone shifted, lower, colder. So I made a choice. If I was going to survive, if I was going to rise, I had to stop playing fair. I had to learn how the world really works. He leaned in closer, his eyes gleaming with something dangerous. The world doesn't reward kindness, Samuel. It rewards power. It rewards fear. Samuel sat still, his body tense. He didn't like where this was going. The man chuckled softly as if he'd read his mind. Relax. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here because I owe you. Because that night you gave me life when I had none. Everything I've built, every door I've opened, and every person who answers when I call started with you. And I don't forget debts. Debts. That word echoed in Samuel's ears like a warning bell. The man tapped the glass with his ring, the sound sharp. I build businesses. Some clean, some not so clean. Nightclubs, transport companies, and real estate deals. I've got politicians in my pocket, cops who look the other way, people who owe me more than you can imagine. I control more than you think. And it's all because of you. Samuel's stomach dropped. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't wanted this. He'd given food to a starving man, not planted the seed of whatever empire sat before him now. The man leaned back, sipping his drink again, calm as if he hadn't just admitted to building an empire on shadows. I could have forgotten you. I could have left you where you were. But that wouldn't sit right. You saved me. So now I'm going to save you. Samuel's hands clenched into fists on his knees. His heart thudded, but not with relief. Something about how the man said it, the finality in his voice, made it clear this wasn't an offer. This was a decision. A path that Samuel hadn't chosen, but one that was opening in front of him, whether he liked it or not. You won't have to lift bricks anymore, the man said quietly. You won't have to eat scraps. I can give you everything you ever dreamed of. Money. Safety. Respect. People will know your name, Samuel. All you have to do is step into my world. The words hung between them like bait on a hook. Samuel could see the glitter of the prize, but he could also feel the barbed edges hidden beneath. He finally spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper. And if I say no? The man's smile returned, slow and unsettling. He set his glass down, leaned forward, and in a voice barely louder than a breath said, Why would you? The question sat heavy in the air. Why would you? It wasn't really a question, and Samuel knew it. The man across from him wasn't offering a deal. He was closing a door. There was no safe way to say no, not to someone who spoke with that kind of certainty, not to someone whose smile carried more warning than kindness. But Samuel wasn't naive. He'd grown up in the cracks of the city, watching men with money and cars roll through his neighborhood, men who looked untouchable until suddenly they weren't. He'd seen them dragged out of their homes in the middle of the night, handcuffed, beaten, or worse. He knew money like this didn't come clean. And he knew the price for standing too close to it. Still, as the limousine cut smoothly through streets where Samuel had once walked barefoot as a child, his mind betrayed him. He imagined what life would be like if he had said yes. No more construction dust clogging his lungs. No more counting coins for a plate of rice. No more shame of borrowing, begging, surviving one day only to starve the next. He thought about his mother, who is older now, bones frail from years of overwork. He thought about what it would mean to finally give her comfort, to put food on her table without worry. But then he thought about how the man had said it, some clean, some not so clean. He thought about the driver, silent, stone-faced, a shadow in the front seat who didn't even flinch when the man admitted to things that would land most people in prison. He thought about how casually the man used the word debt, and how calmly he claimed Samuel's kindness as the foundation for everything he'd built. Samuel felt trapped, like the walls of the limo were closing in. The leather seats that had looked so luxurious when he climbed in now felt suffocating, pressing him into a decision he wasn't ready to make. He rubbed his palms against his thighs, feeling the grit of dried cement still clinging to his skin. One world literally on his hands, another staring him in the face. The man broke the silence, his tone softer, almost gentle. "Samuel, you've been fighting for scraps your whole life. I'm offering you more than scraps. I'm offering you a seat at my table. You'll never go hungry again. You'll never be invisible again." He paused, then added a voice low enough to send chills down Samuel's spine. "You owe yourself that much." The words dug deep. You owe yourself. Samuel had never thought that way before. His whole life had been about surviving, about making do with what little he had. He had never even allowed himself to dream too far, because dreams only worsened hunger. He looked down at his hands again, silent. The man leaned back, sipping from his glass with calm confidence. "I'll give you time to think," he said smoothly. "But not too much time. Opportunities don't wait forever." The limo slowed, and Samuel realized they were already on the corner near his building. The car stopped, the driver stepped out, and the door swung open. The night air rushed in, cool against Samuel's face, but it didn't feel freeing. It felt heavy, like stepping out of one cage only to find himself staring at another. The man raised his glass slightly, almost like a toast. "Go home, Samuel. Rest. When you're ready, I'll find you." Samuel stepped out, his legs stiff, his mind spinning. The door shut behind him with a dull thud, and the limo glided away, swallowed by the city streets. He stood there for a long time, staring after it, his chest tight with something he couldn't name. Fear. Temptation. Both were tangled so tightly he couldn't pull them apart. That night, lying awake in his small, crumbling room, Samuel couldn't shake the words from his head. "You won't have to eat scraps again. You owe yourself that much." But deep down another voice whispered back, "At what cost?" Days passed, but the memory of that limo never left Samuel's head. He tried to bury himself in work, mixing cement, hauling bricks, wiping the sweat from his brow under the punishing sun, but the words clung to him like a stain he couldn't scrub out. Every time his stomach growled during lunch, every time he counted the few coins left in his pocket, he heard the man's voice. "You won't have to eat scraps again." It was worse at night. His bed creaked under his weight as he lay staring at the cracked ceiling, imagining the kind of world the man had stepped into after that night years ago. Samuel would picture tables covered in food, steaming plates of meat, bread so fresh you could smell it across the room. He'd picture clean clothes, strong shoes, doors opening instead of slamming in his face. And then he'd force himself to remember the other part. Some clean, some not so clean. But temptation is powerful, especially when you've spent your whole life deprived. Samuel didn't need to seek the man out. The man made sure his presence was felt. It started small. One morning, Samuel came home from the site and noticed a brown envelope tucked halfway under his door. Inside were neatly stacked bills, more money than he made in 3 months of labor. No note, no signature, just cash. He stood there staring at it, his heart hammering. He knew where it came from. He thought about returning it, leaving it at the police station, but the thought alone made him laugh bitterly. The police didn't care about people like him. They'd pocket it and never ask a question. So the envelope sat on his table for 2 days while Samuel tried not to look at it or think about what it meant. But hunger has a way of making decisions for you. On the 3rd day, when his mother asked if they could afford medicine for her aching joints, Samuel opened the envelope and pulled out a few notes. Just a few, he told himself. Just enough to help her. He wouldn't touch the rest. But it's hard to close the door once you open it again. Then came the favors. A man he'd never seen before approached him on the street one evening. Broad shoulders, dark sunglasses even though the sun was setting. He handed Samuel a package wrapped in brown paper. "He says to keep this safe," the man said, and walked away before Samuel could reply. Samuel's stomach twisted as he carried the package home. He didn't open it or want to know what was inside. He shoved it under his bed and tried to forget about it. But just like the cash envelope, the package was a reminder he was already in, whether he wanted to be. The strangest part was how quickly the world seemed to notice the change. Shopkeepers who once ignored him now nodded respectfully when he walked by. Men on the street who used to push past him gave him space. Even his boss at the construction site spoke to him differently, almost cautiously, like he knew something had shifted. However, respect born out of fear isn't the same as absolute respect, and Samuel could feel it. It clung to him like the man's shadow, constant, heavy, inescapable. Late one night, as he sat on his bed staring at the package under the frame, Samuel realized the truth. He hadn't said yes, but he hadn't said no either. And in this world, silence wasn't neutral. Silence was consent. The man had told him he'd find him when he was ready. Samuel understood now, readiness didn't matter. The man had already decided. It happened on a Thursday night, when the streets felt too quiet, like something heavy was in the air. Samuel had just come home from the site, his body sore and his clothes stiff with dried cement. He wanted nothing more than to collapse into bed and forget the day. But as he turned the corner to his building, he stopped cold. The limousine was parked there. Same sleek black paint, same tinted windows reflecting the dim streetlights. It didn't belong, not here among the broken sidewalks and flickering bulbs, yet there it was, waiting. The back door opened before Samuel could even take another step. The same driver stepped out, silent as ever, and gestured toward the car. No words. Just a hand motion, calm but commanding. Samuel's chest tightened. He could have run. He could have pretended not to see. But deep down he knew better. People like that man didn't wait twice. If he ignored this invitation, it wouldn't end quietly. So, with his heart hammering against his ribs, Samuel stepped into the limo once more. Inside, the man sat as if he hadn't moved since the last time. Same sharp suit, same relaxed posture, but this time his smile was different. Less warmth, more calculation. He poured 2 drinks, sliding one across the small table toward Samuel. Samuel didn't touch it. The man leaned back, eyes never leaving him. "You took the money?" Samuel's mouth went dry. He opened his lips to deny it, but stopped. There was no point. Of course the man knew. Of course the envelope hadn't been a gift, not really. The man's smile widened slightly, satisfied at Samuel's silence. "Good. That means you're ready." "Ready for what?" Samuel asked, his voice low, though he already knew he wouldn't like the answer. The man's tone was calm, almost casual. "To start paying back what you're owed." Samuel frowned, his brows knitting. "I didn't ask for..." The man cut him off, his voice sharper now. "No, you didn't ask. But you did take. And in this world, Samuel, nothing is free. Not food, not respect, not even kindness. Everything costs something." The words hit Samuel like a punch. He'd heard that line before, whispered in the alleys of his neighborhood. Nothing is free. People who forgot that truth ended up in shallow graves. The man leaned forward, his eyes hard. "I don't want much, just small things. You'll carry a package here and deliver a message there. Nothing difficult. But by doing this, you'll prove you're not a boy anymore. You'll prove you're a man who understands how the world really works." Samuel sat frozen, his stomach in knots. He wanted to refuse, say no, and walk away before getting pulled deeper. But the limo walls felt like they were pressing in again, sealing off any escape. And the man's tone carried no room for negotiation. This wasn't a request. This was the price of debt. The man took a slow sip of his drink, then added, almost as an afterthought, "And understand me, Samuel. I like you. I respect what you did for me. That's why I'm offering you a chance to rise. Anyone else in your shoes would already be gone. So don't make me regret this." The words landed heavy, like a threat wrapped in velvet. Samuel nodded, not out of agreement, but because he couldn't find the strength to do anything else. The man smiled again, satisfied, and leaned back in his seat. "Good. Then it begins." The limo pulled away into the night, and Samuel sat there, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey before him, realizing for the first time just how deep he was already in, and how impossible it might be to climb back out. The first task seemed harmless enough. The man had given Samuel a small brown envelope, thin but sealed tightly. He didn't explain what was inside, only told him where to take it. A bar across town, a place Samuel had never been, tucked between shuttered shops with neon signs that flickered more than they glowed. Samuel went there after work, his hands sweating inside his pockets as he clutched the envelope. He told himself it was nothing, maybe a contract, a letter, or cash. But deep down he knew it wasn't simple. Things that came from men like that never were. Inside the bar, the air smelled of old beer and smoke. Men sat hunched over tables, talking in low voices that stopped when Samuel walked in. A heavy silence fell. The bartender didn't ask what he wanted or even look at him. It was as if they all knew why he was there. A man in the corner waved him over. His face was hard, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp like he was always on edge. Without a word, Samuel slid the envelope across the table. The man picked it up, tapped it against his palm, then slipped it into his coat pocket. No handshake, no thanks. Just a nod toward the door, the kind that said, "You've done your part, now leave." Samuel didn't wait to be told twice. He walked out quickly, his heart racing the entire way home. He had expected to feel relief, like he was finally free of the task. But instead he felt something heavier pressing on him. That one delivery had tied him tighter to the man, not looser. The next night there was another envelope. This one went to a hotel, handed off to a man who didn't smile or blink and just counted the seconds until Samuel left. The following week, it was a locked briefcase, heavier than it looked, carried through a back alley and given to someone who didn't bother hiding the gun tucked into his waistband. Every task came with silence. No explanations, no questions allowed. And Samuel learned quickly that silence was the rule in this world. Asking too much could get you hurt. But silence couldn't stop his mind from racing. What was in those envelopes? What was in that briefcase? He told himself it wasn't his business, that he didn't want to know. But deep inside the fear kept growing. Because the more he carried, the more he realized these weren't random errands. He was moving weight, things people could kill for. And yet, the man always made it seem normal. Each time Samuel returned to the limo, the man would smile and pour a drink like they were old friends catching up. He would say things like, "See? You're useful. You're proving yourself." It almost sounded like praise but was laced with something darker, ownership. One night, after a drop-off that left Samuel's nerves shredded, he asked the question that had been clawing at him. "Why me? You have people. Why use me?" The man didn't answer right away. He just studied Samuel with those sharp, unreadable eyes. Finally he leaned in and said, "Because you're clean. You look like nobody. Nobody notices a boy like you walking down the street. That makes you valuable in ways you don't understand yet." Samuel froze. Clean. Nobody. Valuable. The words stung because they were true. Nobody did notice him. He blended in, invisible to the world. And now, that invisibility was being used as a weapon. By the time Samuel realized it, it was too late. He wasn't just delivering envelopes anymore. He was becoming a shadow in someone else's empire. A ghost that slipped between places, carrying secrets that could burn cities down if they ever saw the light. And the scariest part? He didn't know how to stop. Because every time he thought about walking away, he remembered the man's words in the limo, "Nothing is free." And Samuel knew without a doubt that if he tried to quit, the price would be his life. Months turned into years, and Samuel carried on with the same routine. At first they were envelopes and briefcases. Later, it became instructions whispered in quiet places, names of people he had to meet, and directions he wasn't allowed to question. He never touched the contents, never asked, never lingered. He was the runner, the delivery boy for a man whose reach stretched further than Samuel could ever imagine. On the surface, Samuel's life looked better. He wasn't starving anymore. His rent was always paid. He even had new clothes, shoes that didn't tear at the soles, and a little money left to send to his mother. But deep inside he felt hollow. His reflection in the mirror didn't look like the same boy who had once given away his last meal. That boy had been kind, desperate, but full of hope. The eyes staring back at him looked tired, haunted, and afraid of shadows that no one else could see. The man always returned in the limo like clockwork. Samuel would be summoned every few weeks and the cycle would continue. And each time, the man would act like it was casual. He'd pour a drink, smile that same sharp smile, and remind Samuel that he was useful and trusted. Samuel began to realize those words weren't compliments. They were chains. Then came the night when everything changed. Samuel had just delivered another package, this one heavier than usual. As he walked away, he heard shouting in the alley behind him. Then gunshots. Loud, sharp cracks that echoed in his chest. He froze, his legs refusing to move, his ears ringing. He didn't look back, but he didn't have to. He knew. Somebody had died because of what he had carried. That was the first time Samuel truly understood the weight of his role. He wasn't just a messenger. He was part of something that bled, something that destroyed lives. And whether he liked it or not, he had blood on his hands too. From that night on, sleep became impossible. Every sound outside his window made him flinch. Every knock at the door sent his stomach into knots. He began to realize there was no way out. The man hadn't just given him food years ago. He had given him a leash, and Samuel had been walking with it around his neck ever since. Sitting in the limo one night, Samuel finally spoke the truth that had been eating at him. His voice cracked as he said, "I wish I had never taken that envelope. I wish I had never gotten in this car." The man studied him quietly, almost like he had been waiting to hear those words. Then with a cold smile he said, "But you did. And now, Samuel, you're mine. You always will be. The moment you gave me your last meal, you tied yourself to me. That was your first debt. Everything since then has only been repayment." The words cut deeper than any knife. Samuel sat there, silent, because he knew it was true. He had thought he was being kind, generous, human. But in this world, kindness had been twisted into chains. What was meant to save him had condemned him. Samuel stared out the tinted window as the limo rolled through the dark streets. He wondered how many more packages he would deliver, how many more lives would be destroyed because of him, how many more nights he would lie awake wishing for a way out. But deep down he already knew. There was no way out. Once the debt was written, it could never be erased. And so, he sat in silence, a prisoner in a world he never chose, haunted by the memory of the day he gave away his last meal, and the limousine that came back for him years later. Please, if you enjoyed the video, subscribe and turn on your notifications.